Good morning, everyone. I'm Esma van Tonne from the University of the Free State Library Information Service. This is the last presentation of the series of presentations that was organized by me. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Latola from the UP could not present anymore today on advanced bibliometrics. So Cornel Skoutema van Wyk has very kindly, on a very, very short notice, agreed to do a presentation for me on advanced altmetrics. Cornel has more than 20 years experience in the library environment, and between library systems, research and scholarly communications. And she's now the manager of the Digital Scholarship Center at the University of the Free State's Library Information Services. So she's going to talk on advanced altmetrics for research impact and engagement, which is very important for us as librarians, especially librarians in the academic field, to help our researchers understand the importance of altmetrics. I think by now we know the importance of bibliometrics and H-impact, H-index and all that, but Cornel is absolutely an expert on altmetrics, so she's going to tell us more about that. Thank you so much again. And I must say, Cornel is currently on study leave, so this is extra special that she agreed to do the presentation for me. Thank you, Cornel.
You're very welcome, Isma. So, you know, I'm at home, so I'm going to apologize for any household sounds right from the start, just in case all of the bits and other sounds come through. But thank you for the opportunity. I think what's nice about the opportunity to talk about, let's call it advanced altmetrics, is that we're all pretty familiar with the basics by now, the sessions that you arranged for introduction to altmetrics. That altmetrics capture attention, online attention, and the engagement that research gets in the online environment. On X, Mendeley, blogs, your more traditional news outlets online, anything online. But for me, when we at the University of the Free State Library and Information Services decided to subscribe to Altmetric Explorer, I mean, we started advertising it and pushing it to researchers as a way to help give an indication of the wider impact of their research. But it's also just numbers. So every time I attended sessions on altmetrics, I would wonder how other librarians are giving that added value to the service, much like Esma, you and your peers in providing assistance with bibliometrics have ways of adding that value rather than just giving the numbers to researchers. And at first I thought, okay, do we as librarians help, you know, write a narrative around the metrics? And mostly when I asked this question, the answer was no, which I completely understand, because a researcher would have better ways of knowing what the context is within which the research is mentioned online. So when you asked me to look at this, I thought, okay, well, it's now really time to see what would it mean for us as librarians, looking at what's the added value we can give in terms of altmetrics. If we're pushing altmetrics, if we're pushing bibliometrics, if that is part of our support service portfolio, then how do we do that? And I think that mainly in the same way that we support bibliometrics and help researchers to use them responsibly, I think with altmetrics we can explore how we can advise them to use it critically and strategically, looking at what it actually tells us, the altmetrics, the numbers in altmetrics, and how they can then, we can help them to integrate it into their scholarly practice responsibly. Okay. So, as I said, we are aware of the basics of bibliometrics and altmetrics. And I think the biggest difference would be that with bibliometrics, it takes a longer time for the impact to show through citations. Whereas with altmetrics, it's a shorter feedback time. So it does help researchers show that more immediate impact of their research. But let's look at what those numbers then could actually mean for them. Instead of just showing online attention, because that's easy enough to say, but what do these numbers then actually mean? So if we look at a paper that might get 5,000 tweets, but it only has 2 citations, we could look at that. And another paper might have only 10 tweets, but it's cited in a World Health Organization guideline. And I think it's clear that it's not equivalent. One represents popularity, and the other one represents influence on practice and policy. So you can also, if you remember, with the COVID-19 pandemic, there were so many preprints that received huge altmetric attention. But many of those articles were also withdrawn as information came to light and research showed that some of these preprints were not applicable. So I think this illustrates that with altmetrics, attention does not necessarily equal quality. So I think that's the first thing that we can do as librarians, is to recommend to researchers that they shouldn't report altmetrics as a badge of quality necessarily. Instead, they should frame it as evidence of reaching an audience. And that's also going to depend on which audience they want to reach. But we'll get to more strategic communication in a moment. But then I also think that when you start looking at popularity versus impact, showing more societal impact, then we can recommend to researchers that they, when they report their altmetrics, that they distinguish between the scholarly online attention, so, where their work's mentioned on Mendeley, citations in policies or even Wikipedia, and on the more popular, distinguish between that and the more popular attention that you would get on X or other social media platforms, even maybe the academic social media platforms. It's all rather these different platforms. Each researcher at some point will have to look at which platform they will push their work on, where the audience already is and already conversing about that research topic. So yes, that would be my first recommendation actually for us as librarians. Something else that I think we should also understand is, or that we should explain to our researchers, is where the data comes from. So you do the same with your bibliometrics. Bibliometrics you find in different subscription services, different free services. And when researchers report on that, they indicate where the bibliometrics were found. So I think it's important that they also understand where the data comes from. As I said, we subscribe to Altmetric Explorer, and with altmetric.com, they track social media, policy documents, patents, Wikipedia, news outlets, rather a big variety. So I'm most familiar with altmetric.com, but I know Elsevier, I think, has PlumX, and they emphasize certain categories, the usage, the downloads, certain captures and mentions, and also citations. So I think most of these platforms kind of integrate altmetrics with citations. And I know that Crossref also has some data but it is limited. And explaining to our researchers that, you know, each of these use different algorithms and have different coverage. So the numbers aren't directly, you can't compare them directly. But much is the same as I said with bibliometrics providers. It depends on what they index, what they cover. If our researchers can understand that, then at least when they create this narrative around their altmetrics, then they should indicate in their reports what the source are of the altmetrics. And to use multiple sources, if possible. Especially certain research studies will always benefit from, or proposals will always benefit from multiple sources. What I have on the slide here are some nice pros and cons of altmetrics by the Open University that I also think is important to highlight for our researchers. So the pros are obviously that it's not just your traditional research output that can be tracked, anything with the DOI. And as I said before, it gives an early reaction to somebody's work, so it can give them an indication of potential citations in the future. And it can indicate a broader impact, so outside of academia, the more social impact. And that also depends, as I said at the beginning, on where it is mentioned. So if it is mentioned in a policy, and they want to report on that for a funding proposal, maybe an ARF application, it would be important for them to look into that policy where they are cited and make sure that it is in the right context and applicable to what they're applying for. Something that I find the most fascinating about the altmetrics, bibliometrics in a sense as well, but I don't know it that well, is that you can use it as a researcher to follow a trail of, you know, where your research is being interacted with, but not only your own research, other people's research as well. So if you're a researcher and you're thinking about communicating your work and you're wondering where to start communicating your work more widely, and you start looking at where your peers and collaborators and the people that you admire are talking about their work in your subject field online, not just social media, online, then that gives you a good start to a strategy on where you can communicate your work. So not just the numbers, but a way to strategize your science communication. And if you start doing that and you use altmetrics to track the interaction with your work, and you see, let's say you decided on X and LinkedIn to communicate your work, and you see there is a lot more interaction with your work on X, then you adapt your strategy and you make sure that the way in which you communicate is geared towards that platform, and you interact and engage with the people that are there with your audience. A little bit of the downside to altmetrics, obviously, is that also with numbers, it doesn't provide the context. So as librarians, we do need to emphasize that to our researchers, that they provide the context when they report on altmetrics. And well, again, the same with bibliometrics, but attention could be negative. An article could be cited as a prime example of how not to do something. And the same would be for altmetrics or mentions. And obviously, if it's a popular topic, it will be mentioned. With COVID-19 preprints, for example, it doesn't necessarily mean it was good research, but it was mentioned a lot. So it is important for the researcher to keep that context in mind. And as with any numbers game, it can be abused to increase scores. So our researchers must just be careful around that. And then some academics do feel that your social media platforms particularly is too brief a place for serious academic conversations. But I do also think, again, with context, that would depend on your subject field and what type of conversations are taking place and why is the conversation there in the first place. Yes, so lots of things to consider for our researchers. But as I say, even as I'm talking, I can see the similarities with bibliometrics and how we support our researchers there. What I do think we are very well situated in supporting and where we can add, really good value is that we can frame altmetrics within frameworks like DORA, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, something like the Leiden Manifesto that looks at principles for responsible metrics, things like the UNESCO Open Science recommendations that promote equity and inclusivity. So in as much as like with the DORA statement there on the slide where it says that we should change what we value in research, we still need to look at something like altmetrics responsibly and how we use that in reporting on the impact of our research. So if you have a researcher that wants to claim that because their article was tweeted 1,000 times, so therefore it has a high impact, we as librarians can guide them to reframe that and say, my articles reached 1,000 readers on social media, including health professionals and policymakers, and that shows a broad interest in my work. And as you've probably seen with other sessions on altmetrics, if you can delve really deep into a mention, you can go in and see exactly on what platform was it mentioned, who mentioned it. If you look at X, if you delve deeper into a tweet, you can see, okay, this is the person that tweeted or linked to my article, spoke about it. You can go to that profile, see how many followers they have, go down a little bit of a rabbit hole and see who those followers are. But in that way, you can, as a researcher, illustrate that broader impact through altmetrics. But you can't outright say, all right, this is because of the 1,000 tweets, retweets, that means that I have a quality article with high impact. So as librarians, I think we can recommend to researchers that they obviously never use altmetrics as a single measure of impact. And that if they report the altmetrics, that they should combine it with evidence. So for citations, you would obviously add the evidence there as well. With altmetrics, they can, for example, put links to the news coverage or even screenshots, depending on how stable certain news platforms' links are. But the context, as I said, of the policy citation, if it's cited in a policy, look at testimonies that they find online. but definitely to combine it and to add the context, to add to that story. As I said, something that gets me excited is the different ways in which scientific work can be communicated. And the nice thing about altmetrics is that it doesn't show just what was tracked, but it can show how knowledge spreads as well. Yes, and that's what's nice about creating that story. And I think that's why I initially thought that as librarians, to add value, we should help create the story around the work. But I think we can add a lot of value to the story that the researcher needs to tell, to help them understand how altmetrics can help them in their planning with their strategic communication on their work. So maybe if, for example, you've got an article on climate change that's cited in a blog by the United Nations, or a researcher sees that their work is mentioned in Wikipedia, we can tell them, all right, this shows how your work reaches students and the general public. But let's look at helping you plan. Is that what you wanted? Is that the audience that you wanted to reach? So let's help you plan some communication strategies. And what we usually tell our researchers, first of all, ORCID. Keep your ORCID up to date, because people will go to your ORCID ID and look at what you've done. If it doesn't show what you've done, then they might, that's a big part of your online reputation. But things like, share your articles, your data sets, your presentations in repositories so that it's more discoverable. In certain repositories that it creates a DOI, because the altmetrics are tracked by the DOI, so do that. And keep track of which parts of your work are being engaged with. How is it being engaged with? It could be that a certain piece of work is added to many Mendeley lists for potential literature reviews. So that will give you, depending on who's sharing it, that will give you a very good idea of where the potential impact is going to be for your work. Something else that we also advise with science communication is obviously to look at the platform, use plain language where needed. Recently, some of our researchers have asked us about visual abstracts, where some journals are asking for visual abstracts, and then they find it a bit intimidating and maybe move on to the next journal. But something like a visual abstract is a wonderful way of communicating your work, and an easy way for somebody to have a quick view on what it is about. And then, making sure that all of this can be tracked with altmetrics, and looking at where it is mentioned, where the engagement is, and using that for your science communication strategy. So not just measuring, okay, this article was tweeted about so many times, but as I said, delving a little bit deeper, seeing who's talking about it online. Are they just citing it, linking to it, or are they actually talking about it? Should you be engaging on that platform when you see somebody's link to your article and start a conversation? And all of this said with the knowledge that researchers obviously have limited time. So using altmetrics to see where your work is mentioned the most can help you determine where you as a researcher, your effort and your energy should go into engaging with the work. So if you look at some use cases, especially in subject fields like humanities, the citations are very often slow. So for humanities researchers, you can really push altmetrics as a way where they can see impact a little bit earlier. You know, it could be around book reviews or media coverage about a certain book or chapter in a book. And it could also be a way to compare attention across departments to identify, you know, what's really resonating across researchers, across departments. Oh, if you want to look at an institutional view, that's what I wanted to say. So looking at the attention across the different research projects that's going on in a department or in a faculty. So it could be part of a larger university communication strategy where you can do that benchmarking and see what is resonating with the public, what is getting more attention. Is this something we should put more focus on, put more money into, things like that. So I think the same as with bibliometrics, we can tell our researchers you can't compare yourself directly to each and every other person in terms of altmetrics because the contexts are different. But it is very useful to benchmark in a field and also to use altmetrics to track a researcher's trajectory across time with a certain research output or a certain subject field. So initially I asked my colleague Vuyo Ngayeka to join us today because he is rather good at any kind of technical deep dive. But I wanted to also, in terms of, you know, if you wanted to get really advanced with altmetrics, to just indicate that there are APIs in Altmetric Explorer, the subscription we have, for example, and I'm sure with other services as well, we can use these APIs to pull the altmetric data into tools like R or Python for some custom analysis. And I think this would be a wonderful way in which you could map networks of who shares your work or the geographic spread of those mentions, you know, where is the attention coming from? The built-in reporting in Altmetric Explorer already provides a lot of that. But there's always, I've learned from Vuyo, there's always a custom way to do certain things that gives you even more. You could even use that data to compare, you know, or to see if there's any correlation between altmetric mentions and your bibliometrics. So you can really do a lot with that. And I think this is also where us as librarians in support of altmetrics can really come in. You know, you could create a dashboard combining Scopus citations with the altmetric.com data to get a fuller picture of impact. And the thing is, most researchers won't code, but if that is within a library's capacity, then librarians can offer workshops on how researchers can create a dashboard like that. But I think in essence, we can position ourselves as translators between that raw data and what the researcher needs to report on. But any questions you have on this type of technical detail, I am going to refer to Vuyo. So really, I think for me, after thinking about, what our role should be as librarians across all of these dimensions, is just that we can interpret altmetrics. We can help researchers interpret that. They can use altmetrics for the audience that they're reaching, the engagement, but not necessarily the full picture of quality. We can teach them to be transparent about reporting on altmetrics. As I said, just always providing the source of the data that they're sharing on altmetrics, and to combine the numbers with the qualitative evidence to make sure that the context is clear. You don't want them to use altmetrics and it gives more of a bad impression in the end, rather than supporting that their work does have an impact, a broader impact. And to remind researchers of this, the source of this data. So where does it come from? And in comparing with other researchers, the same as with bibliometrics, what's your subject field? You can't compare yourself from humanities to somebody in natural and agricultural sciences necessarily. Although, come to think of it, when you start with interdisciplinary research, that would be a whole interesting way to track attention in interdisciplinary research as well. And then, as I said, as librarians, helping researchers translate altmetric data to their needs, to what they need to report on. Just capacity building, giving them the tools. If you're happy enough to be subscribed to something like Altmetric Explorer, that helps a lot already. But there are different ways to get altmetrics and to help train researchers in how to report on that. And I think by doing that, we can really help them use it responsibly and not just as another number that they can add to their reports. So really, I think it's about altmetrics, if we can call it advanced altmetrics, is about not just looking at the numbers, but really understanding who's engaging with research. How are they engaging it? Why are they engaging with it? And to help researchers get some insight from that. But also, very importantly, helping them to understand that they can really use this as a tool to strategize about their science communication. Communicating about science, about your work, does not end with the publication of an article. And publishers do a lot of work in helping with science communication. But in the end, the researcher, if they want a bigger societal impact beyond academia, they will have to start looking at how they communicate their work. And altmetrics can really help them to create a strategy and to update that strategy on a regular basis to ensure that they don't put in a lot of work online on social media platforms when it doesn't bring any more impact to their work. That is my recommendation for digging a little bit deeper into altmetrics. Thank you, Hisma.
Thank you, Cornell. Very insightful as always. One of your first slides says popularity is not an indication of quality. And incidentally, Prof. Jonathan Jansen has published an article in the Times in last week, where he says, okay, it goes a lot. Everyone is now up in arms because I only read the title of the article, but it's more about predatory conferences. But as one of his sentences is, as one who does educational research, we are among the worst offenders. Scan the papers at any conference of South Africans, and one is astounded by the poor quality and the meaningless titles of academic papers. That's also something to keep in mind. I mean, your popularity is not, I'm not talking about Prof. Jansen at all, please, everyone, but your popularity is not an indication of your quality. And he says that it's this publish or perish thing, and everyone just wants to go out there and put their work out on a conference. Doesn't matter how good or bad it is, and quite often accidentally fall for predatory conferences as well. So that's really something important to keep in mind, that we as librarians should help researchers make aware as well. Any other comments, questions from our attendees?
I just want to add to that, Isma, and that is that that is why something like Altmetrics can help researchers with their online reputation, because that's the thing. Like you mentioned, with maybe inane titles and predatory conferences, you just go for that, the easiest publication path that you can get, the easiest way to do that. But again, that's not where the communication of your work ends. And if you keep falling for that, then it just damages your reputation. So keeping track of that and really looking at your online identity as a researcher is really important.
Good, now we've got two hands. Mokale, sorry. You can just unmute and then ask your question. Or you can type your question if that's easier. Okay, while we're waiting for Macaulay, Bulawa, I see you've got a question as well. Maybe it's better to type it if you can't unmute. Anyone else while we're waiting for that two persons? Bulawa's hand was raised, now it's lowered. I hope I don't see anything in the chat or the question answers. Mokale? Okay, also hand lowered.
Well,
Okay.
anybody's welcome to send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat, or my colleague Vuyo, if there are any questions about the more technical aspects of integrating any altmetrics services with bibliometrics or anything like that. So you're really welcome to just drop us a line.
Okay, anyone else with a burning question or comment? Cornel, either you've talked all over all our heads and we don't understand and we have to go back to the recording, or you were so good that we don't have any, I just get all this very insightful and useful sessions. So thank you very much. It seems like that's it for today, and that's the final presentation then for my series of presentations I organized. Thank you, Cornel, again. Two new messages. Okay, just grateful and wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Cornel. And again, I literally, participants, I phoned her on, I believe, Thursday and said, Cornel, help, please. And she said, yes, why not? So thank you very much, Cornel, and thank you everyone for attending and all the sessions before this. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Yes, Mo.